All right, guys, I want to talk to you about how I came up with this swivel and the journey along the way. Some of you might be interested, some of you might not, but I thought it'd be kind of a cool thing to go over and why I stuck with this theory over. There's so many different ways out there of doing things and just kind of the things that I saw. So I'm gonna bring you up over here. So you're gonna tilt you down here so we can have a look at some of the stuff we got here, okay? All right, so here you have the benchmark swivels, okay? You know, basically they are the swivels that turn under pressure. We've talked about them. Under no pressure, they won't turn, okay? How did I get to that point? Any of these designs that you see out here that anybody's creating, there's a long road, okay? 2017, I think it was about 2017, I may be off a little here, but around there, I finally got tired of losing fish certain ways, and I thought, there's gotta be a better hook rig. And I tried all kinds of stuff, okay? I did some silly things in the beginning. I was like heat shrinking metal bars into these hook rigs and making them super stiff. I was going and buying a stiff electrical wire and wrapping it around my cable so it would really make the rig stiff, and then put heat shrink over. I was making ultra stiff hook rigs. What I found was the ultra stiff hook rigs seemed to find really well, but what would then happen is once you hook the fish, that stiffness now became a problem, and I would pry hooks. So I'd pull a lot of hooks. So I thought, well, what if I could figure out a way to create a hook rig that was super stiff so I'd get that penetration I'm looking for, but then could then become loose and we wouldn't pry the hooks, right? So I'm sitting there thinking, looking, and I start looking at my flying gaff, and I'm like, well, why wouldn't I just make a hook rig kind of like a flying gaff, right? This is something that a technique we use all the time, and it works. If you kept the rod in a flying gaff, it would pry out a lot easier than if you pull the rod out after you gaff the fish, right? So why not make a hook rig kind of similar, right? So that became that journey. And this was before the other products were released that you now know of that have that kind of breakaway rig where the hook can flop around and be free. So I was just kind of trying to figure things out. So here was my original concept, and it looks terrible. Remember, these are prototypes. Anybody that's making something, the prototypes always, it's got to start somewhere, and then you whittle it down. You go through prototypes, then you whittle it down, make a cleaner prototype, then you make your final thing, and then you test that for a while. So here it is. It looked pretty ugly. What I did was I went out and I got a guy here in town to make these clips here printed with 3D printer, okay? So he would print these. Now this rig is super stiff. It's like a gaff. I mean, I could gaff a fish with it, okay? Here's the deal, it pops out. I got some key stock over at, I think, Ace Hardware or something, and I heat shrink that into here to create the stiff rig. So my theory was, I'd get the good penetration, and then once we hook this fish and he starts jumping and moving around, this would pop out. Now I have no longer the rod here, I have free movement here. Here's what I found, and this is why, and basically all I would do is after I catch a fish, I'd put this back in, I'd clip it in, make a little clip pop sound, and it was in. Hook another fish, it would pop out, okay? Here's what I found with that. And this is why I ditched that way of going down that road. And it took me a while, and unfortunately lost me a couple really big fish. And basically what happened, and this is my issue with the breakaway style type rigs, is sometimes you get a big blue marlin that comes up and you just get that big whoosh. Boom, most times that's what happens, right? Then he'll come back and he's all over it and you get a second bite. Maybe even a third bite. Well, what was happening is on that first big bite, doesn't matter what stiffness you set this at, when they hit it with so much force, it would break the rig. Now the second bite, I'm not using my thing. I'm just using a free swinging, hook rig with all this stuff attached to it. And I had a terrible hookup. So if they smashed it, popped it out, broke the rig, and then came back and ate it again, we almost never hooked that fish. And I had times where I would have a nice fish come up, blow up on the lure, come back over, try and eat it, come off, and then boom, blow up on another one, pop it out, come off. And it was like they were just, unfortunately, because when you're creating something, you want it to work so bad that I pushed that a little bit probably farther than I should have. And I did lose some big fish because of it. And so what I ended up trying to do was just create these stiffer and stiffer and stiffer to the point where then they weren't breaking out, and then I was prying hooks because they weren't breaking out. So then I thought, all right, well, how can I do this so that I ensure that it doesn't break out until we're actually fighting the fish? So I created a little reservoir, like a little, it's hard to see maybe, but it's basically a little square in there. And I put it in my rubber stoppers. And I'd drill it in there, I'd set it in there, I'd get it in there. And you'd always you have to make it perfectly centered and on the bottom. So I'd put that in there, and then what I would do is get a key, and so that would be the female part. So that's a hole that goes in there. It's a copper tube, basically square tubing. Then on the hook rig, I would do another one right at the shaft, right at the shank of the hook. And then I would slide a key stock. So I had now this super stiff rig, wouldn't break, but once we hooked the fish, we're fighting it, and the lure slid off and slid away, the male part would slide out of the female part, either on the hook side or the lure side, and fall away, and I wouldn't have it anymore. Now you were just hooked to a loose rig. And it actually did work pretty well when we hooked them, and the lure slid away. And the other thing was that you know, what I would find would happen is that, you know, you'd pop it off, whatever, or you'd have a fish hit it a couple times and that rig would stay attached. But once we'd hook them and this thing would slide away, you know, then we would be in a better position. And so what I started doing was, because it was connected by a rod, I could attach an inline, just a swivel, because I wanted a hook rig and everything to be able to swivel around. But the problem with having a just regular swivel in there is that you're just gonna have a bad hookup rate, because as they eat it, the hook's gonna move around and you're not gonna get, think about gaffing a fish. Would you want a swivel on your gaff when you're trying, a free swiveling swivel on your gaff when you're trying to gaff a fish? No. So, but with that, I was able to put a swivel in there, because once this came, because the rod was keeping it stiff, it wouldn't move anywhere. So once that rod came out, we lost the rod, now we're on a swivel. And I found that if we hooked them and we got that lure to slide up and away, we generally caught that fish. Very few pulled hooks. The problem was, not every time this lure will slide up right away. Sometimes they jump 3 or 4 times before it slides away. And when that happened, we almost always pulled hook, because it would stay stiff, and now you got this stiff ass rod, this stiff ass, you know, this whole lure thing, and it would pry the hook and boom, popped it out, and I'd get it back, and it would still, the rod would still be in there, the hook rig would still be in there. That didn't work. So onwards we went, and I thought, well, the swivel's working. What if I could just create a swivel? And then at that point, I think I fished the HIBT tournament, and I didn't want to try any of this stuff in there, so I just went straight with this heat shrink that we used, and I had a really good hookup rate with it because of how the stiffness was great. It would break away at the hook here. I was really happy with it. So I said, well, shoot, what if I could figure out how to get a swivel in there, use this heat shrink as the stiffness that will break here or break up top here, and then have have a swivel. Well, that started that journey, and that's how I went down that rabbit hole. It took a long time. You know, some of the early ones we made, I would just take swivels and put them in here and heat shrink them in a way that basically they would turn, but it took pressure to turn them. And we did well. And then as I adapted and, you know, made it differently and continued on, we got down to the road where now you have the benchmark swivel. So I'm telling you this story because I want you to know that this didn't just happen overnight. This isn't just some random idea I came up with. I've been working on this for a long time, and then testing it and running it. And honestly, it's almost hard for me to let it out to the public, because I really do think it's a huge advantage. But I want people to catch more fish. I want to get this out there to you guys. It's something I'm really stoked about. So check it out. Please show your support. And yeah, I hope you like the little journey I took you on there to make something. And hey, more importantly, if you have an idea and there's something you want to try and fish in or make something better, go frickin' do it, man. And I'm telling you, you're gonna fail about 60 times or more, but sooner or later, you're gonna start catching and you're gonna get there, and the journey's fun and creating is fun. And go out there, you know, like we need more innovation in this industry, and we all should be helping each other and pursue to push this sport farther and catch more fish and freaking have a good time. So anyways, there you go. Check him out. Thanks for the time.